سهام، في اسئله ولا شيء حد جالس من Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello, very warm welcome to all audience and everyone across the time zone to ASIAD Group webinar number 19, which is organized usually by ASIAD QHSSC team and sustainability, of course. Our sincere apology for keeping you waiting for this webinar, but that was because of out of our hand for the technicality issues. I am Ahmed Al-Rawahi, the Group QHSSC Manager, and really I'm delighted to facilitate today's webinar, which is related to how resilient are we in dealing with the next crises. As you know, we have Global Risk Report 2023, which has been recently published by the World Economic Forum, and this is part of our coverage to that report and that exploration. I feel privileged today to extend my greetings to all audience who are attending with us through the Microsoft Teams and LinkedIn and YouTube and other platform for the next 1 hour and a half, inshallah. And on your behalf, I would like to welcome my honored guests who are the subject matter expert in this field for the risk around the world. Please welcome with me from Asyad Group. On my right hand, I have Mohsen Al-Rustam, Group Chief Financial Officer. And on his right hand, we have Ghaith Al-Darmaki, the Group Chief Technology Officer. Next to him, we have Isam Shaybani, Vice President, Sustainability and QHSSC, who is my boss. But today we'll make an exception. We'll split the hats.
Split the roles, huh?
Okay. From Marsh McLennan and Marsh, we have here at Asyad headquarters Wilfred Montero, who is the country sales and corporate segment leader. And online, we have Talal Darras, who is the senior vice president of strategic risk and consulting. From South Africa, and also related to Marsh McLennan and Marsh, we have Gert Wal, client markets leader and senior vice president at Marsh McLennan. Please welcome with me our honored guests who invested their time, of course, and experience to share with us. As usual, of course, if you have any questions and any clarifications, please don't hesitate to share with them at the chat box. And we'll seek the time at 15 minutes, maybe or so, to discuss it amongst the subject matter expert. Maybe I can start now and dive into the global risk report with Gert. So, Gert, can you hear us clear?
Thanks very much, Ahmed, and good afternoon to all of the panelists and also my co-hosts today and the audience
Sure.
that we have on our webinar today.
Well, directly going into the report, it seems we are in a very difficult time ahead, as per the report, and there are a lot of threats about us. I mean, we already have been through a tough time during 2020, and going beyond looks like there is a lot to go in through. Perhaps you want to talk to us about what really stands out in this report for you.
So really, in terms of the report itself, I'll basically see that it addresses issues that our global business are being confronted with, and really talk about the interconnectedness of risks, which are really complex right now, and also the interconnected crises, which are really complicating in the short term, and also requires different actions for us in the long term, as well as our strategies there. So as a result, we think that organizations will need to consider new and adaptive resilience approaches in 2023 and beyond. So the Global Risk Report, with which we are a sponsor of, really pulls those opinions. And we think that the risk report can really be a valuable resource for accelerating and identifying and also understanding all of those critical risks. And we can also then think about using this report as a reference point to see which other risks we need to be more resilient for going into the road ahead.
Right. So, have you explored through a presentation, or at least some of the summary, or we can call it as executive summary, so that the people they have just a glimpse on what we are talking about as a summary from a Marsh McLennan that you have already released to support in January of this year.
Correct. And as you can see, it's in our 18th year of publication at this point in time. So each year it comes out. And what it does, it has really two sections for us. So the first part is really getting the results and polls from all of the experts in the risk field. And this can be from business, from government, from the academia, and also civil society. And the World Economic Forum really relies on the views of those 1,300 global experts to set the scene, and that's the first part of the report. It speaks about all of the risks that come out. And in fact, then it was also augmented by additional views in what we call the perception report. And that's an additional 12,600 executives that provide their opinions in terms of risks across various regions. And it allows the report not to only speak on the global level, as it does in the first part, but then also on a regional perspective in the second part in terms of the perceptions that we see coming through. And during this
Well,
part,
yeah, excuse me, if I may stop you, are you sharing the screen? Because we're having a difficulty maybe to view it in our screen.
yes, I am actually sharing the screen on my side. I can see it. I'm not sure if I need to press anything else. I can definitely see it on my
Okay,
side.
so, okay, great.
Are you seeing it on your
Please
side? Okay, good.
No, it's please go ahead.
Good. So basically, they're looking at the
two
parts of the report. There's an analysis facing risks. There's actually 32 risks that are being discussed in the report. And then, of course, we use as a reference to use some of the key risks to discuss some of the thematic deep dives that we have. So those thematic deep dives that we have in terms of our emerging catastrophes, it's also got sort of a new word that's coming out, and that's a buzzword from the report talking about polar crisis. And polar crisis really referring to a cluster of related global risks, which if you put them all together, is much, much more exacerbated than just the sum of the individual parts. So if we look at the four main themes that come through from our global risk report, you can see that the global economic and commercial pressures is the first theme that we get. And then there is a theme that has come through in the report from the respondents in terms of digital, technology, and cyber. Thirdly, climate and biodiversity, not just short-term, but very much also long-term. And then fourthly, health and well-being, which is really as a result of the first three, really impacting on humans in this way. So if we go back and we look at what do we see coming through in the report from our respondents at the global level, you can see that the cost of living crisis, everyone is currently familiar with what that means, but it means different things to different parts of the population and in different parts also of the world. But effectively, the rise of inflation has caused the central banks to exercise their mandates, and they are aggressively containing inflation globally, which now, of course, then causes a longer than expected higher interest rate and a reduction in liquidity. This is just the macroeconomic view, but we also see that because of this effect that we have in the economic and trade policies of countries becoming much more critical to keep those resources to themselves and secure that there is a supply chain decoupling happening currently in the global economy. And probably also for you at ASEAN, this is probably something that you see firsthand every day. We also see that the effect of these macroeconomic policies is creating growth stagnation, which of course then creates difficulty for investment going forward. And we also see increasing debt distress in some economies already coming through. So we then start and we look at what is happening in the digital and technology side. And again, this is really linked. We really look at what is the changing nature of our cyber threats, the rise of AI models being introduced as a new risk. As much as it is a tool, it also creates risks for us. And we have seen just the exponential increase in state-sponsored espionage and the effects that it has on the global economy, and as well as organizations, just thousands of organizations across the globe being affected by this. We also see that there's an erosion of privacy in terms of what's been shared online, and then heightened surveillance across the globe of what is being shared. This then, creates an impact and a convergence of these emerging technologies using new AI technologies as well as existing models of privacy and surveillance technologies, which exacerbates also this risk globally. Then if we look at climate and biodiversity, which is really a long-term risk where you need to start now. We've seen this also with the region with the recent COP27 and then COP28 being planned this year. But really looking at how do you achieve a reasonable trade-off between your food security as well as conserving your nature and your resources. And out of this, we see unintended impacts that are coming out of the climate mitigation strategies and also the green imperatives on our natural ecosystems. If we take it further, we can see that there is diversion of resources from clean energy programs and nature preservation. And that leads us into the fourth area, which really talks about our health system capacity, challenges amidst all of these financial constraints. You take all three together, you put it into the health system, you can see that there is constraints coming through. Medical inflation rising even faster than what we see in the general economy. And then some new threats in terms of mental health coming through, which impacts the workforce that we deal with. So really the report at a global level, looking at what are the risks, and then it will go into some more granular detail. But I also think that the report can be used to look at some opportunities for us going forward, how we can capitalize on that. I think if we go further, if I hand over to my colleague, Wilfred, to just take us through some of the global perception risks, we can see what are some of the particular details that we want to take into account. And we also plan for our own risk registers and what we want to take forward. Wilfred, handing over to you.
Thank you, Head. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our viewers who are listening to this. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I think it's a very important subject, very critical to be more precise on what we are speaking and what we probably have to do in the near future. Going straight to, what Head mentioned, and connecting into the granular details of what we're going to speak about. This risk, as the survey, which as Head mentioned, has been collected over 1,250 experts, business experts, policymakers, etc. I think based on certain questions on what has been asked of them. Now, as it has been bifurcated in two sections, we look at basically looking at short-term risks and long-term risks. Now, if I ask anyone, and if we have been following on what's happening across the globe, the left-hand side would not come to anyone of us as a surprise, right? The number one risk is cost of living crisis. I think more of self-explanatory, but even if I want to deep dive into it, take a basic example, food price, for example. There are certain countries, certain sections of our community, of our society, who are at such a point in life where, making that money on a daily basis and actually trying and buying food is becoming a problem. Various things associated with the cost of living crisis. Number two, which is not very far, natural disasters and extreme weather events. We've seen it all happen. The glaciers melting, the forest fires across, the death of marine life, etc. The list goes on. So that is something which is a very, very important point in the very near future, what we have to look at. Geo-economic confrontation. Of course, a bit different from the geopolitics, which we always speak about. But where we look at, countries, societies, flexing their own muscles, trying to become self-controlling, and that leads to, who actually has that sort of power, leads into sort of a confrontation. I think that is definitely perceived to be one of the most severe, which comes on number three. Failure to mitigate climate change. Talk about it. We can probably talk for hours and hours on what is happening across the globe. Climate change is a topic, or probably even was a topic some time back. And of course, if you see the fifth one, erosion of social cohesion and societal polarization. If we go back years when we were probably a bit younger and these things didn't happen. I think social cohesion is if I even have to define it, it's basically the strength of community members, coming together. Polarization is basically, I mean, if you see on the low income to high income, it's getting, there's a lot of bifurcation. We always talk about 2% or 3% or 5% controlling the entire sort of, wealth in certain countries. It can go up to 10%. I think that's getting deteriorated day by day. And I think that's definitely a big concern. Now, if I change our view on a long-term sort of view, where we look at 5 to 10 years, and why do we even mention 5 to 10 years? Because these are sort of risks which we see it has to take in long-term sort of events. To overcome or to mitigate this risk, it takes time. I mean, if you see the number one and number two, failure to mitigate climate change and failure of climate change adaptation, they definitely go hand in hand. If we do not mitigate climate change, and if we see those sort of risks evolve and exist in our sort of environment, how do we adapt to that is also a very important point. Natural disasters continues to be on both the list, right? Unless and until we do not take any preventive measures on global warming, for example, these topics are definitely hot off the pan, where people are talking about it. Biodiversity loss and ecosystems. We all remember in 2016, right? What happened in Australia, for example, the overwarming of sea waters led to the Australian reef barriers being bleached, and it was a big sort of a damage which actually caused to the reefs there. So that is definitely another one which stands on number 4. Last but not the least, the fifth on the list, if you look at the long term, large-scale involuntary migration. I mean, we know what's happening across the world, right? Nobody wants to leave their own homes and go somewhere else. But there are some events which are happening. It can be a war, it can be coercion, it can be forced sort of migration, which is basically leading on to this sort of a risk, which I really look at it from a very critical point of view, right? So to basically sort of sum this side up, and even to continue, right? It's not only the top five where we look at the long term risks. If you see what's even following, the severity between the first and the last, it has not much of major difference. So if you want to look at only the top 5, I think it's very important to even to look at the bottom 5. There are many more, right? Now you have, other than what we spoke about from the first to 5, you have natural resource crisis. Definitely that's coming up. Erosion of soil, social cohesion. It's not only on the 0 to 2 years, the short term, but also on the long term. Widespread cybercrime and cyber insecurity. This is what actually happened in the last 2 years, right? Where there was rampant cybercrime and cyber insecurity, where a lot of people lost a lot of money. Geo-economic confrontation, of course, which stands on the 9th place, and large-scale environment damage incidents. I mean, if I have to sum that, and you look at, for example, it's all green everywhere. Now, green has been a color which has always been, yes, these are the safe things to look at. Red has always been perceived that, yes, we have red signals. But this is something very different. Green has been categorized as the environmental risk. Believe it or not, it's a fact. When we started this a decade back, there was only one green risk in that list which was published at that particular point. Look at what the world has come to. Look at what this has led to us. And if we do not do, and I mean, look, the situation looks grim, but there is a solution, right? We should not wait to that particular point of time where the whole thing gets exploded, right? We have to collaboratively, collectively get together, find solutions, and make sure that we make this place a better, make this earth a better place to live in, right? If we move on to the next slide, and this is something which is a bit difficult to digest. I would like to take a moment here for our viewers, because there's a lot of sort of boxes, a lot of color codings, regions, and numbers. Take a 10 to 15 second. I would like you to absorb what's on the slide. Yeah. Since I've given you this sort of moment to reflect on what's on this side, I would like to hand over to Talal to proceed and explain further. Talal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Wilfred. And thank you, dear panel speakers and Asyad, for giving us this opportunity today And when you think about it, and I'm very happy that Wilfred mentioned for us to take a couple of seconds and go through this. To be really honest with everyone, I've been reading this report for the past 10 years. And every time I read it, I feel it pulls me down, or it takes me through a type of scenario in my mind that it's all about risks, it's all about threats, it's all about what could go wrong in the future. And being a risk professional working in risk and in trying to mitigate risk, I can tell you I'm astonished every time I read this. And it's important that we take these risks into consideration in decision-making process as people, as organizations, as governments, as regulators, because the more we factor those risks into our day-to-day lives, into our decision-making, and I will always talk about people because it all starts with us as family members, as parents, brothers, sisters, husband, wives. It all drills down to us as people. A typical example that I can give you, when the power failure happened in Oman a couple of months ago, there was one person who was part of a crisis management team, and his core priority was to get his children out of school. So we need to think about how important we need to try to ensure continuity, ensure resilience. If we take a look at the top concerns by region, and if we focus on the cost of living crisis, I mean, we're seeing how governments and central banks around the world are trying to control the economic downturn and increase interest rates. And that has automatic impact on the cost of living crisis. So we're trying to mitigate a recession that's going to happen down the road, and the governments are trying to control it. Yet this inflation is impacting the people. It's impacting organizations. It's impacting supply chains. It's impacting inflation, which is bringing prices to go up. So there's always a replica effect of a decision happening somewhere in the world, or a government or a central bank, and how that automatically drills down to the people at the end of the day. And it's also linked to the debt crisis, and how we can see how global powers and state intervention is happening to try to control this. It's very important to take a look at how there are some risks that are not number one
Resilience, I was taking the point and challenged maybe in trade. Maybe I can summarize that as an inflation or sustained inflation. Based on my view to the global risk report, it's mentioned in 3 times. I was taking a point about this. It was top 5 risk over the next 2 years, and it was ranked as the risk number 89 from the countries surveyed in the report, and also as a number as one of the as it is in the GCC.
I think thanks for the question. I think it's quite interesting when you see the top 10 risks for 2 years, the immediate ones, and also the 5 years. So you look at the top of the list, of course, cost of living, and the rising, of course, inflationary risk and everything. But then look at the next 2, basically the geopolitical, geoeconomical trade wars we have today, and which has been there even pre-COVID. And then, of course, you have the extreme weather conditions as well. So I think if we rewind back before COVID, those 2, number 2 and number 3, the extreme weather conditions, the extreme historic droughts you had in South America as well, main locations for harvesting grains, for example, and that has been going on for a while as well. that actually facilitated, let's say, the supply chain bottlenecks as well before we even had COVID. And then, of course, the geopolitical and geoeconomical, the nationalistic kind of view between the major two economies in the world as well, US and, of course, China. You could see that there was a risk of cost of living rising. Of course, then we had COVID. With COVID, the era of lockdowns, of the governments trying to stimulate growth. So there's the quantitative easing. They're trying to pump liquidity into the market, to the economy as well, easing down on some of the restrictions, on some of the, let's say, tax regimes as well. And then, of course, with that period comes the savings with individuals, the pent-up demand, let's say, with leisure and business travel as well. So all that actually, let's say, jump-started the cost of living risk. We come to then post-COVID, and of course, we don't forget the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. So that all accelerated that for the entire globe. Of course, you've asked me about the MENA region and GCC, and we're definitely not disconnected from the entire world. So we're feeling the pain just like everyone else is feeling it in the rest of the world. But if I maybe dig a bit or dive a bit deeper into this region, maybe we can differentiate between MENA, non-oil exporting countries, and then GCC, of course. So the non-oil exporting countries are part of the MENA region. You see the risk very similar, in fact, even more than the developing economies around the world. Rising inflation, skyrocket, cost of living as well, devaluation of the currency as well, especially and the rising debt crisis. Egypt, Tunisia, Turkey as well, and these are the kind of countries which very much, Egypt, of course, I think they are the largest in the world importing wheat or grains in general, and they've been hit very hard. I think those kind of countries are where you see sort of a friendlier aid or bailout from other prosperous countries that they are waiting for to assist them to come out of these crises. If you then look at the flip side, maybe the GCC countries, of course, again, the risk is there, but then being fortunate and exporting oil and gas and having the inflationary risk and the cost of living major component being energy crisis, we saw that in Europe as well, and us being, or the region, GCC in particular, predominantly an energy export region, that allowed these budgets for these countries as well, and the fiscal policies with the surpluses to divert that more into, let's say, subsidies and relaxing some of the, tax or delaying, let's say, some of the tax regimes which were announced before as well. So those subsidies have cascaded down to individuals, to businesses as well across GCC. If you look at GCC in general, I think the expectation on average for inflation is hovering around 2 to 3%. Very much the pivotal point for the the developed economies, or the US as well. Oman being the lowest in terms of inflation within the GCC, at 2%. So again, I think being an oil exporter very much helped this region in the interim, although that risk still remains high.
I like the point that when you highlighted about the energy sector which was impacted. Maybe I will get back to that point, but in between, I think Talal already online now with us.
Yes.
Carry on, Talal.
Yes.
We have taken the chance, to cover the point related to the inflation and economic crisis in between until you get connected now.
Excellent.
Okay.
Apologies, but I hear the echo of my voice. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So apologies again for the technical difficulty. So if you want to speak about the turbulent decade to come, and we've heard panel speakers talk about this as well, we're actually converging into a very unique and uncertain decade going forward. So we're talking about economic downturn perspective. We're talking about how the governments are reacting to climate change, how organizations are trying their best to adapt and to ensure utilization of effective measures when it comes to net zero down the road. Central banks, mostly in developed markets, US and the UK and the Eurozone, are also making a very tight rope between inflation and trying to control the triggering of a very deep and prolonged recession, and trying to protect their own citizens from this cost of living crisis. If we want to talk about some of the cyber attacks, and we're seeing how cyber warfare is becoming one of the top concerns of governments, and we're seeing the investments in research and development into cyber warfare as an increased risk from a government perspective, and it's also impacting organizations because every organization is trying to ensure cyber resilience when it comes to critical infrastructure, when it comes to logistics, when it comes to the power grid, when it comes to oil and gas, and all the way down to critical infrastructure like sewage, water supply, electricity supply, healthcare system. So cyber is also becoming a very top priority for a lot of C-suite agenda items in board meetings, in risk committees, as well as in your industry as well. I think when we talk about Asyad and the different industries you guys are in operation, there are a wide spectrum of risks that should be considered as part of the decision-making process. Supply chain failure is a key one. Natural disasters is a key focus item for Oman, considering the different scales and impact of the severe weather events that happened. When we talk about currency and fuel price fluctuations, you also have global operations, which clearly impacts your operational cost. So this is also factored in as part of the different risks that organizations or C-suite think about. I think the political scene is also important to discuss. And a key example that we can give is there were several key indicators that a war is going to happen between Russia and Ukraine. And these indicators were very clear from the Russian side prior to the actual war starting. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves, was this anticipated? Were there any decision-making processes that had to take place to ensure that we are resilient in nature before the war actually happened? And to what extent are we resilient to be able to cater to the needs of our people, our organizations, and the citizens of each of the governments we were in? If we go to the next slide, we are also going to talk about some of the industry-specific risk considerations, the critical supply chain risks, and how that can easily impact the reputation of a company or an organization. We spoke about cyber risks. We have interesting discussion with the panel around ESG risks and the accountability of organizations and governments around that. We also spoke about political risk and some of the sanctions that are happening globally. And you're seeing some companies who take it as an opportunity, and they're growing their book of business in certain parts of the world due to the problem that has been faced from the government side. On the next slide, we also want to talk about some of the industry-specific risk considerations. And what are those? And I think it's important that each organization puts a priority in how they want to tackle these risks and how they want to ensure continuity of business, and in many cases, actual organization to continue to make a profit. So these are the three main pillars that could be a good consideration for organizations to think about: cyber resilience, when it comes to ensuring what are the cyber threats that can impact the organization, what types of threat, what's the impact, what's the financial impact on it, and how best to try to mitigate it with your stakeholders. And I will highlight stakeholders because you have multiple stakeholders as part of the supply chain. And when it comes to cyber, everyone talks about, yeah, IT is managing it or cybersecurity team is managing it. But cybersecurity is a business risk. It is not only an IT risk. It is not only a cybersecurity risk. It is a business risk. And that's where all the organization collectively has to enhance their resilience in nature to overcome these risks if they happen. Now, if we go to the next slide, we're talking about the words proactiveness. And what do we mean by proactiveness? We're trying to anticipate what could go wrong in the future. We're trying to be proactive in nature to try to adapt to the future. So if we're investing in a different country, if we're going into a different playing field as part of our diversification, we need to look at what are those risks. That has to be factored in from the start. Aligning macroeconomic factors to the organization, because there are a lot of factors happening globally that are impacting my business today. What are those down the road? To what extent are we able to mitigate those risks down the road? And if we talk about the communication and responsibility, it's important to ensure proper risk management is implemented, taking into account emerging risks, taking into account overall resilience of the organization in order to ensure continuity of operations. Let me hand over back to my brother Ahmed to take you through the next step on the panel discussion. Thank you.
A vital point related to the cybersecurity and especially some of the effects they have captured from the report. It was discussing the anticipated attacks against the energy sector and the financial firms, and especially also the public security. Maybe I can direct this question to Ghaith Darmaki, our group chief technology. So Ghaith, in light of what we have just cross mentioning, and also have Mohsen have came across talking about the energy sector getting affected, and with a heavy reliance on the technology of the future. Where do you think the logistics and the marine and port and the terminals in general, not only in Asyad, it's getting, or are they ready for these kind of risks?
Thank you, Ahmed. I think it's, as mentioned by Talal, it's a business risk. Cyber is becoming a business risk which would have a very big impact on an organization. Being a part of logistics, which is a very connected industry, you have so many stakeholders. You have so many connected systems. And with the impact of COVID, stakeholders now are very open to different technological evolution. They are open to access to data. So the flow of data between different parties, different stakeholders is actually very important. Then you have actually the scarcity of the capacity on the supply chain. And to minimize that risk, we start adopting a lot of technologies, being AI, being robotics, and all of that. These kind of technology evolution actually brings a lot of risk when it comes to cybersecurity. And it is fortunate and maybe unfortunate that this evolution is really rapidly growing. We don't expect that people would, or even businesses will actually stop using technologies because they are actually, technology, I always say that is increasing our productivity. So being a business or an individual. And we are adopting a lot of these technologies going forward. And in doing that, we are exposed to these cyber risks. There's no doubt. And on the other side as well, the other part of the game is the availability of cyber attacks. Tools, systems used in these cyber crimes are becoming cheaper, becoming maybe available to everyone. And of course, this is the dark side of the cyber that everybody actually can do to the a cyber attack. And if you look at the cyber evolution in the last few decades, it started with unplanned, unskilled attacks and all of that. But today, 82% of cyber attacks are cyber crimes. These are organized crimes against businesses, against the government, where the attackers actually having the full resources in terms of financial tools, systems, people to do that. And of course, there is a lot of gains. These are the gains they are looking is financial gains, more or less, or reputation gains as well. So we are not actually away or far away from a well-connected industry. We are exposed to this and will be becoming more and more exposed to these risks. So building a cyber resilience systems is a very critical for any, actually, I would say, businesses today, and specifically on logistics where stakeholders has to be connected. The interchanging of data is actually happening, and it will become more and more.
Yes, that's correct, absolutely correct. I share with you the same concern, and along with that concern, I think from the report that it has been highlighted by Talal and Wilfred and Gert, there are 50% of the risks related to other aspects related also to the climate change. So the ironic side, if I may call it, over 30 years of advocacy and diplomacy, talking all of the international aspects of the climate change, but none of them is highlighting the core and addressing that kind of a concern over a decade now. Now they are suffering from an increase in global warming by 1.5 degrees. So all of those risks have been highlighted. Several risks mentioned for the climate change in the risk report, especially for the upcoming 2 years and also the upcoming 10 years. Where Assam is seeing that we should monitor, and for the next couple of years, where is the most concern and the ticking point that it can monitor more and we can shed a light more?
If I go back to explaining the climate changes, the climate risk. The climate risk happened that since the Paris Agreement in 2015, where the global agreed that they should have a climate change mitigation plan and with a plan of net zero. However, from that time till 2019, even after COVID, till the COP27 that happened in Glasgow,
Yeah.
there were no pure commitments to meet this net zero plan. So there is a challenges of political will was not there, because there is still a debate between scientists and politicians on this is not true, this is not true. So this is make it a huge risk to mitigate who to follow, either exactly the scientists or the politician who actually they are funding the project or funding the businesses that we can. So it was big debated. Till only last year, where the IPCC, the International Intergovernmental Council, where they have actually issued their first report, or the second report following up on that. And that report have a 3,600 study where it tells you, yes, if you don't do this, the climate change, then definitely you're facing a real challenge with that. That have triggered a huge risk. That's happened only like that. Have triggered exactly what the challenges are, what our limitation is, and the political will, and even the initiative that we're doing. Are we really mean it, or just we pledge our net zero plan, but there is a greenwashing behind it, where government and entities where they put the plan, but actually funding those plans becoming this way. Even after the COP27 in Scotland, when everyone announced that yes, this is my net zero plan, then the challenge happened that the funding for it is another challenge as well. How do you fund this net zero plan? So it's becoming that yes, this is our plan, but again, I had the money before, now I don't have the money because of the effect of economic crisis, the energy security. So all this have contributed. I think one of the second risk is the crisis and capitalism. All this make it like contributing the factors. So we cannot deliver on our climate change, climate adaptation, all the climate affair businesses, or our environmental obligation without funding, without everything. So it's all interlinked together. We come back to the E and S and G, the ESG frameworks or the EFG, they work in parallel together. So your environmental challenges will affect your social impact. And your social impact definitely have a key player on your governing yourself.
Yes.
So all this work together, either entity governments or entity profit making, or even the way you perform. And I think it's all linked together, the E and SG.
Exactly. So going back to the base point, where should we monitor? Which risk? Is it a climate change? Is it a climate adaptation? Or natural resources? Because more than 50%, as I said, is being categorized for the next 2 years. And also it pressing more than 60% of those 10 risks, the top 10, it was highlighted during the next decade. So which one of these? Is it a climate change or?
Actually, it's a cascaded effect. If you follow one, then the other one will follow. For example, if you follow a program, your climate change, definitely there is need of money to climate adapting. Definitely need to recover from the diverse environmental crisis happening. Okay,
Yes.
so all this interlinked together. So if you follow one, it's cascaded effect that will follow the second one, third one. And then definitely, if you tackle on the environment, you definitely affect the social as well. So your cost of living will go down because you will have no drought, you reduce the drought, you have economic prosperity where the social life will increase. So definitely the E will affect the S, and then definitely your economic will thrive.
Exactly. So you have just pressed on a point. I can relate it maybe to Wilfred in relation to greenwashing, financial or green financing, or even the ESG itself. I mean, maybe shedding a light more on the insurance as a subject matter expert during the last 20 years. Maybe how do you see the insurance industry impacted in Oman from the last decade, if I might call it?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Amit. I think, look, we listened to the three gentlemen who you spoke about, sort of COVID, the droughts and all those reasons. You spoke about cybercrime, right? During the corona time, what happened? You spoke about sustainability, where a lot of these factors are right now, everybody's looking into them. They have answered this particular question in briefs, in parts. And if I may sum it together, if you see over the last 10 years how the insurance industry has moved, I think it has depended a lot on what the gentleman just spoke. Now, and I'll add another thing to that, natural catastrophes, natural calamities. If I sit today and if I look at the insurance market, what it was 10 years back, it was quite smoother then. But all these sort of factors taken into consideration have a direct effect on the insurance industry. Let me give you an example. Natural catastrophes. After Mekur, what happened? For us as risk mitigators, and when we look for a client, when we go out into the market, it becomes a bit difficult, right, to place risks. Why? Because there are insurers, there are reinsurers sitting on the backside, and when you have such sort of natural catastrophes happening, I think people, sort of take a step back, and they don't want to probably go into it directly or indirectly. That has effects, right? It has direct effects on the price. That direct effects on the deductibles, it has direct effects on the sublimits, limits, natural catastrophe is sublimited nowadays in a lot of these property policies as we see. It's become a bit tough, right? Cyber crimes. Earlier, nobody even asked for a cyber policy. Probably nobody even knew about it. A lot of people did. Now, suddenly you see the cyber sort of crimes happening. This is where a lot of people are actually rushing to the markets. What is happening? The capacity sometimes becomes low. There are new players come into the market, which is a good news for us, right? So from that point of view, but what happens to the prices? At the same time, the less demand, of course, the prices definitely go on the rise. ESG, probably nobody even knew about it. Environmental. So we at March also have this sort of thing where we help our clients, look at it from an ESG point of view. So to answer your question and to sum it up, I think the various points, various factors connected to even what Talal and Herj spoke about, all the risks, what we've seen has impacted the insurance industry in a way to sort of see rise in prices, less of capacities. However, I think it makes our job a bit difficult, more tougher to go into the market and procure sort of insurance terms. We are looking at it positively because we see a lot of new players coming in and helping us help our clients.
Great. You came across mentioning about the emerging markets or the new players in the market. And this reminds me also the effect or those new in the market getting affected by all of these crises or all of these risks being highlighted in the report. Maybe Gert, maybe you can shed a light on this, or from an international prospect, maybe you have came across the same webinar in the past talking about the new markets or the new players in the market who are maybe facing a challenge to adapt, especially if you are talking about the climate change or the new regulations, the same ones that Assam has highlighted, or even if they are getting affected by the ones highlighted by Wilfred.
Yes, thanks very much, Ahmed. And what we see is, of course, in this broader climate and sustainability area of risks and concerns, ESG is a way to try and measure and report from a relative perspective how one organization stacks up against another one, and how you're doing in reality on your plans. So looking at that, there's various different reporting standards. And of course, insurers have to also grapple and get their minds around what they are. So I think here what we've done to be a little bit more proactive and lead the conversation is we created basically a risk rating tool for ESG that any client can complete. And it's something that we can provide to insurance companies that gives a relative score. And what this has done is really created the conversation with the insurers at that level, so that they can start to think about how do they incorporate information that we are providing through with regards to physical risk, and then on how they price for that. And of course, insurers have to deal with risks from a empirical and scientific perspective, so they need to see a direct correlation between the action that you take and a reduction in risk. And so this is where insurers don't have a long timeline where they've been measuring any of these. So what we see is increased take-up in terms of the thinking at insurance companies. And so one of our more recent reports looked at whether or not insurers already considered ESG factors in their underwriting risk rating tools, and 38% of them already indicated that they were. We also asked them whether or not they had used ESG risk rating providers to assess their clients, and 47% already indicated that they did. And then when we asked them about whether or not they expected ESG factors to play a bigger role in the underwriting process in the future, 100% of them said that that would be the case. So that's one part of it. Then, of course, what we see in reality coming through, that's obviously where we want to see the proof, is what will be brought to the table. And effectively, we're seeing in a number of lines already provisions of increased capacity if you score high enough in a risk rating tool. And that's, of course, subject to their own underwriting guidelines, but that's a pre-qualification criteria. And also reduced deductibles. So this is currently where we're seeing it, and that trend is on the rise. So I think that's the more we have markets that are able to deal and assess ESG risk factors, the more we will see competition, and the more we will see clients who are able to differentiate themselves in terms of risk profile also in this area, getting access to better terms. Thanks, Ahmed.
I think we'll open the door for any questions from the audience who started already sharing some of the questions. I may start with the question to Muhsin. How do you think organizations should look into to mitigate the rise in debt issues and economic downturn?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Of course, it's very challenging times, as I mentioned as well, for organizations. A typical response would be, I think, when you have challenging recessionary, risks as well, cut costs all across, maybe curtail some of your investments as well.
Yes.
That's, let's say in the box kind of a immediate solution for most organizations. For us in Asyad, we're an integral part of the national economy in Oman.
Yeah.
We play a very vital role when it comes to the agenda of the government, not only to diversify the economy, but also to amplify the logistics sector. We take that role very seriously, and we look at although times are challenging, but it's not only a bottom line solution where you cut costs, it's also a top line solution. Where can I bring in more revenue? Where can I diversify my revenue streams? And that's something we've been working on even pre-COVID. So we don't rely on a single stream of revenue or an industry within logistics. And it's actually one of our key objectives or a metric to achieve our next 5-year goal as well. When it also comes to cost and the rising debt issues, we've looked at innovative ways where you can restructure the debt, take an arbitrage. Some of the debt we've seen let's say almost a negative correlation due to the fact I've mentioned before, the ample liquidity and from the GCC and oil exporting countries, which cascaded to the local banks as well. So we've restructured some of our debt from USD to Omani Riyal. We've extended the maturities as well. We've played, when it comes to, let's say, financial risk management or hedging schemes, we've played a very active role rather than a passive role where agnostically you would hedge or not hedge simply by following a policy. In fact, what we have done, it was more of a market reaction to what the interest direction are going. If they are bound range, we would actually hedge in a very innovative, a cap on a floor mechanism. And if they're heading into a one specific direct direction, we'll either ramp up our hedging or start unwinding some of our hedges. So fortunately, we've been able to, when during COVID and during the very ultra low interest rates, we've been able to ramp up our hedging, portfolio. That is paying its dividends today, where most of our hedged position are in the money, and they well above compensate for the unhedged positions where there has been a rise in the cost of debt. So I think these out-of-the-box solutions are very vital to survive in this era.
And I can commend that, and echoing with what you're saying, that this is part of business continuity management that we are looking at from the risk perspective. So this is helping as well, the ASIAD endeavor to get a certification for ISO 22301 on the business continuity. Another question related to Ghaith. I think it has two sides. So to what extent do you see ASIAD is prepared for cyber attacks? And in general, where do you see Oman readiness in the same aspect? So let's cover first of all ASIAD preparedness as a group, and then let's cover Oman later on.
And I think when you look at cyber risks, you can really isolate a business or an organization from the ecosystem. I think the attacks is coming mainly from abroad or within the organization or within the country, but mainly it's coming from outside of the country. So collaborating with all the ecosystems, be it in Oman, be it within ASIAD, different BUs, within the Oman itself, within the worldwide and the region is really a must in mitigating these risks. Right. So when it comes to ASIAD, I think 2 years back, I think we've already started the journey in establishing our unit in mitigating, the information security or cyber security, threats and risks, and we have a clear roadmap what exactly we wanted to do. I think from cyber security perspective, you can have the most expensive tools, the most sophisticated systems, but if you don't have actually the right capabilities, who are rarely existing in the country or worldwide. I think what we've gone through different journeys. First of all, in the 2021, we've started trying to attract actually talents into the organization. We've managed unfortunately, technology people and specifically cybersecurity specialists are very expensive to retain and to attract. So then we've actually shifted to a more, development kind of talent strategy. So what we are doing actually, we're trying to mix and match between senior people and attracting fresh people and developing them within the organization, because we realize actually there are few people who are very expert and they are moving from one organization to another. That's a fact, unfortunately. So it is actually part of ASEAN, even mandates and objectives to develop the capacity within the country. So we've started doing that. Of course, in parallel, we've started strengthening our technical systems. We've started doing a lot of awareness programs, and we've seen it, I think, in different channels. And I think it's a journey. It's a risk that is growing.
Yeah.
We're trying to catch up with a lot of sophisticated attacks every day, but also very critical that we create our capability and capacity. And in Oman, I think there have been a lot of movement, good progress in this agenda, because we've seen, going back to the regulation, there's been a lot of regulations, policies, laws in cyber, law. We've seen also the establishment of Cyber Defense Center, which the mandate, the national mandate of protecting, the country. We've seen data protection laws. We've seen also information security policy from OIA. We've established our OIA as well. So, and we have also the cyber, the Advanced Cybersecurity Academy to create the capability. So I think it's a journey. We can't say that we are 100% sure, but I think we are on the right track.
Next question it's from Nasser Al-Hinai from LinkedIn. I think I can direct to Isam this question. Hoping we will have a real life scenario on the sustainability agenda or anything related to the applicability of the agenda and the plans that we can talk about from ASEAN prospect. What is real life?
So actually, there is many initiatives. We call them initiatives within the group because now still unregulated. The government have announced the net zero plan by 2050, but yet they didn't mention how much exactly we need to meet by 2030, 40, all the way to 50. But we have two school of thought. We have initiatives within the group where we calculate our emissions. We put a target to reduce emissions. We practice at the ESG throughout the business. So there is a lot of initiatives happening there. The regulated part is the shipping part, where in the shipping there is a stringent target. We calculate our emission on the ships, not mainly the emission, but again there's the CII, which is a carbon intensity index, where it is well structured, well calculated methodology that we follow. So there is unregulated within Oman and then regulated within the global market of IMO. So we follow it up, including the MARPOL regulation that we follow. Right. So we are between two school of thoughts, regulated and unregulated. However, a lot of things happening in this movement. Some of them we call them initiatives yet. Until the regulation will come in Oman, where these are your emission reduction plan, you have to do it. And then they're also becoming a compliance rate or a mitigation rate or regulation that you have to follow. That's kind of
okay. That's clear. Another question from Hanan Al-Jahwari from the LinkedIn as well. She's talking about how can we face risks without doing mistakes, and I can link it also with another question related to why the report is not giving any solution. Maybe Talal Darras, can you address this question, please?
Of course, very, very valid and important question. So the solution is different when it comes to different industries. It's different when if you're a regulator, if you're a government, if you're an organization, if you're a small business. So the solution, there is a portion of the report that talks about how best you can be resilient in nature. And you can refer to that. But the main objective of the report is what are the emerging risks that are happening, and to what extent is the impact or the likelihood of it happening. And that's the purpose of the risk. What's important to do is to reflect those risks into our day-to-day activities. It's to reflect that risk into our decision-making process. It's to reflect that risk into the strategic mindset in organizations, in the strategic objectives, in the KPIs that are being monitored on a periodic basis, in how you're perceiving risks, in the discussion of risks in board meetings, executive workshops, and risk committees. So that's the main objective of the report.
To the economic side or economic crisis, from Hanan El Jahwari from LinkedIn, she's asking about how can we control the economic crisis? Is there any mitigation internationally being taken into consideration, or anything being lately addressed within ASEAD?
That's a very, very open question.
Indeed, it is, yes.
It wouldn't be control. It would be, so you try to, of course, there are some risks that you take, normal business risk within the business. And there are risks which you try to mitigate, so you don't even enter that business, or you don't even entertain, let's say, those risks. And then you have risks which you can transfer. And that's where the role of insurance or hedging or your partners come, or you create a natural hedge. Let's say when you have two streams or more of revenue as well. Yeah. So a number of solutions. But I guess if you talk globally, yes, the rising cost of living, the inflation is being tackled by governments, and it's been mentioned here as well by my colleagues. The central banks around the world as well, with hiking the interest rates. Yes. Sort of trying to, we're not going to, I know we think that maybe we're trying to avoid a recession, but actually we're trying to ignite a recession, or maybe a softer landing to a recession-like environment where we curtail the inflation, and the economy reach to maybe a healthier level, or a position where the inflation and the cost of living is not then stopping the growth at a normal pace. Yes. So that's been happening globally, I think, and Oman is, of course, following that as well. Oman has been, since the past 2-3 years, of course, supported by the oil prices as well, but then also after we've came out of COVID, a number of investments, or initiatives to attract investments, a lot of investments when it comes to hydrogen and non-fossil fuel economy dependency initiatives, but also deleveraging, restructuring of the balance sheet as well. That was coupled with the rising, oil prices, the liquidity improvement in Oman as well, yes, and the positive sentiment from the rating agencies. So, and that has happened quite a few times over the last 2 years. Oman is hopefully now on the brink of coming back to the investment grade club since I think the first entry in the last 6 or 7 years, and having a balance sheet or a debt level much lower than it used to be a year or two ago compared to GDP really puts Oman in a very perfect, and the GREs, including ASEAN, in a very perfect place, to stimulate growth going forward.
Right. So, that's clear. I believe we start getting a number of questions from the investors, especially related to the economic side. Start piling up. But unfortunately, our dear audience, I believe we're coming at the end of our webinar today. I can understand that we have started a bit late. However, as a summary, I may highlight the main aspect of this report. Please do communicate with us through LinkedIn, through all of the ASEAD platform. We can accept the questions, and accordingly we can reply them one by one. I would like, on behalf of you, I would like to thank all of the guest speakers. As an advice or a summary, maybe I can highlight that last year's potential risks are now clear and present danger. Especially geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruptions, as the guest speakers have highlighted, debts, labor market gaps, protectionism, and educational asperities. All of these moving the world into, we may call it as a choppy waters. We need, of course, to navigate these existing risks while keeping a visibility on the emerging challenges such as climate change or climate adaptation or increased cyber vulnerabilities, and of course, international mobility barriers. And remember something else: you can't manage what you don't measure, and you cannot mitigate what you don't know. This is a takeout that we can keep into consideration. So we invite you all to read the report if you haven't done so, and please explore it in your organization, discuss it amongst your teams. I'm wishing you a successful journey in the business, and thanks to all speakers, Muhsin, Ghaith, Isam, Wilfred, and online, of course, Talal Darras, and great from South Africa. And thanks to you, our dear audience. Stay tuned for our next webinar, please, inshallah, which will be upcoming soon. Due time will be highlighting that. This is Ahmed Al-Rawahi. Until we meet again, thank you again, and have a nice evening, inshallah. Ma salama.
In a world driven by connections, Oman beats at the heart of global trade routes, using integrated logistics solutions from coast to coast to bring every opportunity to your doorstep, connecting you with the thriving global markets through one of the world's fastest logistics hubs and the most efficient ports, making Oman and its ever-expanding operations a smart choice for global trade and businesses. Connect to the world. Connect to Oman.